we want a demon phallus, and how big? What does it look like to you? Blah, blah, blah. And to have those real conversations and then be able to, you know.
I had a nickel every time.
So I'm a big fan of the First Omen. I've watched the movie like 3 times already. It's crazy. It's crazy. I love it so much. The first thing that I want to ask you guys, I want to pitch this to both of you, is the movie deals with a lot of heavy thematic elements. It's phenomenal horror, but there's definitely some very serious conversation to be had around what's happening in the movie. And I'm curious what the response has been, what you've heard from fans since the movie came out and has been in theaters and people have been able to see it.
I mean, it's been pretty overwhelming and positive, you know. Awesome. It's been also a lot of love from the ladies, you know. I think we've gotten a lot of response of people just being excited that this stuff is being talked about, and it's been a very rewarding experience. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
What would you say, Nell? It's a bit similar for you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've read everything. I'm not gonna be like, oh, I never read the reviews, I'm so enlightened. I've read everything. And like all the comments, and like socially, it feels like we struck a chord with people, and people seem to, you know what, I think people had low expectations. I think people thought, oh, studio prequel to like just leave the Omen alone. And I think that was kind of fun before it came out, like, because like, you know, we had no idea how it was going to be received, but like knowing what we did and what we made, and like I was super proud of it, and I was kind of enjoying the fact that everybody had such low expectations. And then people were pleasantly surprised and they enjoyed it. But like, you know, thematically, people got it. It felt like, which was really nice. Obviously, you know, nothing is for everybody, and there were some people that, you know, drew comparisons or you know, made up their mind that it wasn't for them, and that's totally fine. But I think we got the horror lovers, which was the plan.
Yeah. One of the coolest moments of my life was one of the first Zoom interviews I did, and the journalist, who's this really rad lady, and she was sitting really close to the camera, and she goes, "This hard," and I was just like, "Yes, yeah."
I'd like to echo that. I mean, I don't think our video team or my editors would appreciate me saying that, but yes, that sentiment, absolutely. And I think picking up on that, there's something that I want to ask you, Arkasha, specifically about a dynamic that I think I noticed in the movie, and I want to know if it's just something that that was just me, or if that was intentional. But in the way that the nuns and the sisters are kind of forced to be this, they're kind of the ones forced to get their hands dirty, while Bill Nye and sort of the priests are able to like be this soft, soothing voice of reason, this extended hand of comfort. And I was like, wow, that's a really fascinating layer of discussing what women deal with in religious hierarchies, specifically Catholicism, I guess, in this situation. And I wondered if that was on purpose.
You were absolutely right. And I love that you picked that up. Thank you. Yeah, the women do the work. And this is, you know, this is a story about Margaret and her journey, but it's also a story about what happens to women and their relationships with other women in a really oppressive institution where they're given absolutely no autonomy. And it's like you fall in love with these women, and then they start to turn on each other, and that's what happens.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Bill gets to sit on a throne, you know, and has no blood on his hands. And so it was kind of a real tragedy in that sense. Especially when the script gave us opportunity to really humanize a lot of you know, these tangential female characters. So thank you.
No. Listen, I'm glad that most of the time I'll ask a question like that and they'll be like, yeah, that wasn't on purpose. I have no idea. So I feel vindicated. Thank you. Nell, you know, Margaret I mean, she deals with a lot, and her character evolution is incredible from the first time we see her to the last time we see her. I'm curious for you if there were any particular scenes or any particular moments that stand out as having been more challenging than others to really like get into the mindset and capture Margaret as best as you wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the beginning, the earlier scenes in the movie were important because, you know, you had to care about Margaret, but you had to believe her, and the film didn't lend itself as like a damsel in distress movie. That's not how it felt. It felt like, you know, Margaret didn't become like a warrior by choice. I think she would have much rather none of this go on. But she, she had just these horrific things continually happening to her. And it was just about getting up the next morning and going back to work. And that's like, going in and returning to the scene of the crime where these awful things have been happening to her. And also these awful things that happened to her in her childhood, echoing through into her adulthood. And like, I think that, one of the scariest aspects about Margaret and her life is her childhood, and the fact that she was constantly being told not to trust her surroundings and what she sees, and not to listen to the inner voice. And it felt like I think the most pleasant trajectory for me to do was that, yes, physically she becomes stronger, and yes, she overcomes all of these things and this physical violence, but like emotionally, she started trusting her own voice. And that moment where she stabs Bill's character, sorry for a spoiler, anybody, but you should have watched it by now.
It is
but the moment where she does that and she says the line, I can only hear my own voice. I think that's like the biggest moment in the movie for her, in my opinion, because it's the first time that she listens to herself and she made the right decision. So yeah, I mean, just her finding her autonomy and trusting herself.
Arkasha, I do want to ask you about, there are some sequences that are very jarring and important. What I'm most curious about was the process that went into capturing that, and like your FX team, and like what the conversations that you had to sit down and have, like, here's what we want this to look like, and here's how we want like it's fascinating to me.
Well, it was, we worked with the Moreau team, SFX team, or Makeup Effects team, sorry. And they were absolute geniuses. And, the whole crux of this film is that Margaret doesn't know what is real and what's not. Mm-hmm. And that started to happen to me with their prosthetics and their work.
Oh, wow.
They're so, we really valued the practical approach. And the Moreaus are like dark wizards. The work they do is disturbingly detailed. And so it was really delightful to be tricked every day on set and think like, oh, there's a woman's vagina and she has no head or legs. Oh, that's our prosthetic. Lovely. And to be able to have those conversations with people, like, I love horror fans, and they're such horror fans, and to be able to say like, okay, we want a demon phallus, and how big? What does it look like to you? Blah, blah, blah. And to have those real conversations, and then be able to,
I had a nickel every time.
In 2 years, you just start saying this stuff in public. Demon phallus. Yeah,
demon phallus.
It should be spiky. And so
being really elegant, and I just totally derailed that. I was so perfect.
I was saying wax on it about that. So anyway, what was your question again?
No, but you answered them essentially, like talking about kind of like putting that together and the process of sort of like finding what that's going to look like and how it's going to look on screen, and yeah.
And it's so interesting because what looks real in person doesn't necessarily look real on screen, and that was such a learning process for me. And then also just how there's always such a fight to do things VFX because it's faster, it's easier. And so we really wanted to guard the practical approach, but there's this whole other, problem solving that goes along with that. And it's just really fun.
Yeah.
So Sorry, that's a very vague answer, but
No, it's not. It's good. That's good. And you're right. Like when you're a horror fan, the language that you use a lot of times works within the sort of like community, but like when you try to talk to people outside of, like, I don't know if you guys saw Beau is Afraid, but like when you try to talk to somebody about it, like a giant dick monster, you can have that conversation casually with another like genre or horror fan, but just any person who like only goes to the movies to watch like Top Gun, they're like, who are you and what are you talking about?
We were doing auditions for The Hand coming through the vagina, and we had men because of 𝐏𝐏𝐂𝐮𝐿, male, so we were having men do that, and so there were, I probably on my phone had 15 videos of hands coming through vaginas, and I'm just sitting in a cafe just like no. And
if I'd been next to you, I wouldn't have even blinked. Like that's what we would get.
Yeah. I forget, like,
you just are like, oh,
is it normal? I'm gonna get or something.
Perfectly normal thing to scroll through in a Starbucks. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I watched a lot of the interviews that you guys did around like the initial press for the movie. And Nell, I noticed that in a couple times you talked about how you didn't necessarily go into filming with any sort of specific like idea in mind of what you wanted, not necessarily doing any like a whole lot of like prep or whatever. But I am curious if there was any conscious decision to not do something, if there was anything that you said, well, I want to make sure I don't do this or I don't bring this into me, because I feel like sometimes omission is as important as addition in a performance. That's not how you say that.
I'm with you. No, I think that whole question is very astute and very correct. To be honest, I actually try to make no decisions till I get there. Because you can really mess yourself up if you do that. If you make too many choices before you get to the first day of shooting and you make them off of your own volition, you could come up again. I mean, I hadn't started working with 𝐏𝐨𝐲 yet, but like you could come up against somebody who had a completely different idea for the character. And if you've done all this work in this time and you've made all these choices about what she should be like or feel like or sound like, and then you come to your director and they're like, well, no, that's not what I wanted it to be like at all. You can work yourself into a hole there. So I just genuinely, I will read a script. I'll read it once and I'll have that. And then, you go and you figure out the relationship with your director. And, thankfully this one was 𝐏𝐨𝐲. But yeah, I just think if you make too many choices before you get there, it can get really stagnant and it can feel planned. So
well, it was so fun because like you being that open and free, like I wasn't quite sure who Margaret was going to be, and then there's this moment in the movie where Nell, it's very early and she's in the hallway and she's waiting for Sister Silva to come back, and it's right before she meets Carlita, and she's standing and you slip and then you immediately like this, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's Margaret.
There she is.
Yeah. And the like little,
because I actually slipped. Those boots were slippery.
That was real.
It could be honestly a 5-minute behind the scenes of me slipping over. I'm so serious.
It's true, but it's lovely and very endearing.
Is it too late to add that to the DVD?
Yeah, right.
Stumbling. That's why I pictured it.
I get it. I guess the last thing that I want to ask, Arkasha, is to you. Conversations around the idea of a sequel or a story continuation and all that always tend to happen with projects like this, I'm sure, and especially a legacy franchise like The Omen. And I'm curious if going into the movie or at any point you had any kind of a blueprint for what might happen next, or if there's anything like that. Yes.
Well, I have a million ideas. I think we all have quite a few ideas that we're very eager to explore. But I think also, going into this film, people were very skeptical about if this film could earn its place. And so I think it's been nice to get such positive response and let the film's this sounds so new agey, but this film really kind of told us a lot of how it wanted to be. And I think being the sequel, a possible sequel to the prequel, the same way, and not milking the cow too hard, I think it's been nice. Yeah, if any of that made any sense.
I was with you the whole time.
Thank you.
Oh yeah. Thank you guys very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. I want to make sure that I say all this and I say that it right. First Omen, it's coming to digital retailers on May 28th. It's going to be on Hulu May 30th, and it will be on Blu-ray and DVD July 20th. So hopefully I got all of those right.
30th.
July 30th? What did I say?
20th.
I said that wrong, and it's 30th, and I always get something wrong. And
oh my God.
Yep. My track record is clean. Always something wrong. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate the movie. Incredible. Thank you so much.